The hitbox debate has been going strong for years, but with Capcom's recent announcement, it's really sparked back up, and there's a lot of misinformation about exactly what it is and why leverless controllers in general are so controversial in today's FGC. If you want a more in-depth breakdown, Brian F just put out a great video that I'll link below, but if you're like me and you don't really want to watch a 30-minute explanation video, here's our argument dumbed down in just a couple of key points. First of all, before we even address it, let's talk about SOCD and why it matters. SOCD stands for simultaneous opposing cardinal directions, and it basically just refers to being able to press up plus down or left plus right at the same time. It was already necessary to remove the ability to hold left and right because in games like Marvel 3, where mix-ups were such a large part of the strategy, holding both directions actually gave you a pseudo block button and a massive unfair advantage. In the last decade, we've discovered a similarly unfair, air quotes, advantage with the flash kick motion or charge moves that use down into up. The ability to press down into up in one frame and remove any travel time that a stick or a pad would normally have has been a big advantage to charge characters and a big reason why a lot of people have switched to leverless in the first place. Famously, Daigo actually switched to hitbox when he started playing Guile, which caused his controller to be infamously banned from tournaments for a while. The hitbox defenders generally fall into one of two camps. Either the accessibility of hitbox makes me able to play games, or the hitbox has advantages and disadvantages similar to pad versus stick and should be allowed. The first point, in my opinion, is basically unassailable. Many people have hand and wrist issues after playing stick or pad for years, and it's just not possible to play the game at a high level on those devices now. Hell, the boxed controller for Smash is a perfect example of why we need alternative controller types, and it's basically a leverless controller in itself. The damage that wave dashing does on people's hands is going to baffle doctors 10 years from now. Smash hands is a real thing, and the box is a real solution. It's an alternative controller they can use to continue to play the game. The same type of thing exists for traditional 2D fighters as well. Things like the Ergo box and the split boxes have the same advantages, and they fall into the camp of leverless controllers. In my last video, I talked about how I play on Mixbox, which has really similar properties and is also considered a leverless controller. It's basically more similar to a keyboard than it is to like a traditional fight stick or pad. The second point about the hitbox having advantages and disadvantages is attacked a lot more. And the problem with this argument is that while yes, there are some things that are harder on hitbox, execution difficulty is not something that can really be considered when talking about the highest level of gameplay. In his famous rant video, Era said,
"Do things because they're hard, not because they're easy. They went to the moon. The moon. They probably looked up at the moon and thought that was fucking God at some point. Couple thousand years later, we are stomping on God's face, putting US flags in his ass. Nothing's hard. You could do anything. Roll cancel, dude. These guys do roll cancel in their fucking sleep."
I had to include this just because I love this example so much. What he's talking about is a CVS2 mechanic, roll cancel. It was thought to be so difficult and impractical that it wouldn't be used competitively. And a couple years later, everybody's doing it. It's a requirement to play the game. The point is that you cannot look at a difficult mechanic and judge by its difficulty if it's going to be used or not. If it's the best way to play the game, everybody's going to be able to do it soon. And for the most part, I agree with him. I think once you get to the highest level of play, you kind of have to understand that everybody is going to optimize as much as humanly possible, and you sort of have to take that argument out of it. There are a lot more nuances to the argument, but those are generally the biggest defense points of hitbox. So now let's talk about the hitbox hater point of view. First one can be summed up in one word: cheatbox. This viewpoint is pretty common among some of the older players in the scene, and it generally boils down to if a pad or a stick can't do it, it shouldn't be legal. I'm not sure I really agree with this personally, but I can at least understand the mentality, and just looking at it from their point of view, it's hard to see them doing things that you literally physically cannot do on your controller and just be okay with that at a competitive level. On a casual level, sure, everybody agrees you should be able to play with whatever controller you want. It's not that big of a deal. But once you get to a competitive level, if you're starting to have a hardware level advantage, that's when things start to get a little murky. The second point, and the one that I have the biggest issue with, Eris also talks about in his video at length, this is not enforceable. Similar to the accessibility argument, I just kind of think this point is impossible to debate. The TOs cannot enforce SOCD. The players cannot be expected to self-police. If people can cheat, they will cheat. And at this point, it just becomes a matter of who gets caught and how often it happens. tournaments. This is going to be even more prevalent now that an update is required to make hitboxes tournament legal. And I'm really interested to see how they're going to even try to enforce this, because how do you take somebody who has a non-updated hitbox and an updated hitbox and prove which is which? It's going to be very, very difficult for everybody involved. If you want to learn more about these, I've linked Brian F. and Eris's kind of rant video in the description. Both do a pretty good job of explaining in more details the issues and hurdles with regulating and enforcing a standard for these controllers. I think Brian F. falls more on the defense side of the debate, although obviously he came from a stick, so he kind of has his own issues for it. And then obviously Eris is just completely against it, so he falls more on the cheatbox side of the debate. But both should give you a pretty good viewpoint of what each side of the argument is. If you're like me though, just grab some popcorn and wait to see how everything turns out. You know, I'll download the update for my Brook board and move on with my day, and I'm just hoping my custom controller doesn't get banned anytime in the near future. So what do you guys think about the cheatbox? Let me know in the comments, and I'll catch you guys in the next one.